In today's Farm Report, the recent ruling by the World Trade Organization to allow Canada and Mexico to impose $1 billion worth of sanctions per year over the U.S.'s cool or country of origin labeling rule has made some lawmakers get back on the hot seat to change the rule or, as the U.S. House did, repeal it entirely. Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has the implications of any decision.
The labeling of meat products as to their country of origin was brought up many times from the 1980s on, with the first actual law requiring it being passed in 2002, with changes, amendments, and debates all along the way to the present. It's always been a highly controversial idea, creating a lot of debate, which also continues, and will continue now that the World Trade Organization has ruled the U.S. system in violation of WTO rules and has allowed Mexico and Canada to impose sanctions on U.S. products. Now, Mexico and Canada had asked for $3 billion a year in penalties. What they got was $1 billion.
The WTO decision affirms the fact that, indeed, they were overstating their damages.
But Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack told us $1 billion is still a lot of money, especially now that U.S. ag exports are already declining because of strong competition and the strong dollar. The only way to head off the penalties is for lawmakers to do something with the country of origin law. The Senate has yet to act on it, even though Senate Ag Committee Chairman Pat Roberts said way back in June,
"You cannot ignore the fact that retaliation is imminent and we must avoid it."
Senator Debbie Stabenow introduced legislation that would get rid of mandatory labeling and would instead include
the establishment of a completely voluntary product of U.S. label for beef and pork, similar to the voluntary Canadian label.
But that was in June. No action yet in the Senate. Meanwhile, the House voted to just repeal the whole thing. Secretary Vilsack said doing that would be overkill. Instead,
they can focus on the provisions of COOL that actually created the retaliation without necessarily eliminating all aspects of COOL, some of which people actually like and are benefiting producers without necessarily violating WTO rules and regulations.
There will be more heated debate on this in the weeks to come. Kansas State University economist Glenn Tonsor says this thing has been controversial from the start.
There's segments of cattle producers that thought this would be beneficial to raise the value of U.S. Originating cattle, and there's segments that did not. And then you also have to think through vertically throughout the meat chain. The meat processor is the one that has the direct implication of this, right? That it ends up having to put a label on the product, before it gets to retail outlets. But the indirect impact on producers is important, right? Some producers think this is a benefit to them, some do not.
So it'll be interesting to see what lawmakers do about it. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington. Music from the hit charts of Argentina, an up-and-coming world agricultural nation too, producing roughly a third of the world's soybeans, a growing amount of corn. On Thursday, it will have a new president and government. Just back from there,
had a fantastic trip.
The chairman of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Outlook Board, Seth Meyer.
Talked to a lot of folks both within the government, several folks who are called delegates, who are the equivalent of our NAS officers, who described how they go about doing their business, very informative, and talked to several producers about their thoughts in light of a change in government down there.
The outgoing government had a policy of keeping domestic food prices down by slapping high taxes on exports of farm goods. The newly elected president, Mauricio Macri, vowed to reduce or eliminate those taxes. So farmers and analysts around the world are waiting to see what happens there. But Seth Meyer says don't expect this week's USDA World Supply and Demand Report to reflect promised changes there.
We take policies that are in place and use those
until new policies are in place. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The holiday season is one where the scale can go up if you don't watch your portion size. Gary Crawford with the U.S. Department of Agriculture shares some tips on how, if you're hosting the party, you can keep your guests from waddling away.
There is this parody of the song "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year," which is called the most fattening time of the year. We've used it before, verse 1. Now here's verse 2.
It's the scale flattening time of the year. While your diet you're blowing, there's calories going straight down to your rear.
Yeah, now there will be a million parties and meals that we will likely be going to over the next month, and we're going to eat and gain weight. But what if it's you giving the party? Is that what you want to do to your guests? Maybe you can
give people the opportunity to eat healthy at your home.
Karen Inslee, an extension nutrition expert, Rutgers University. So how can you do that and not cheat your guests? I mean, you don't want to be like Daffy Duck and only serve like water and stale low-fat chips.
Sky's the limit here at Daffy's Holiday Fest. Come and and get it.
Yeah, sky's the limit, yeah. But Karen Inslee says you can still put on a great dinner or party and help keep folks from taking in too many calories. And here are some tips. First,
Don't cook for 5 times the folks that you've invited. You don't have to cook a tremendous amount of extra food. That's number one. The more food you put out, the more the group is going to eat. Limit the number of selections and limit the amount you're putting out.
next, don't put out huge plates for people to use. Use smaller ones.
Smaller plates would definitely use a supper plate, what we call a supper plate, rather than a dinner plate. And you want people to have half their plate be fruits and veggies. So you want to make sure you have 1 salad, maybe 2 salads, and make sure you have 2 to 3 vegetables, not just meat and potatoes. You want to have other green vegetable, maybe an orange, yellow vegetable, and then maybe 1 starchy vegetable or pasta or rice. So you want to offer people more of the fruits and vegetables category. Grains, we'd like to see people eat as many whole grains as possible.
And she says the enemy at holiday time, the big one, is the buffet. Now, maybe you should not do it buffet style.
I think it's much better when you have people sit down and actually either it's blue plate style, which means the plates are already made up, but you basically people are being served on the plate, either family style, blue plate style. It's better than just an open buffet.
So there you've got it. Now, some great tips for a nice holiday feast. So, Daffy, after hearing that, now what are you going to serve now? Huh?
Some sodas and a nice big bag of pretzels.
Well, at least it's not a buffet. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.